You can be in a relationship and still feel profoundly alone. Not the obvious kind of loneliness, but the quiet one that shows up when you're talking and realize no one is really listening. When you're hurting and feel you have to soften your pain so it doesn't make the other person uncomfortable. When you're together, but you feel unseen. And what makes this loneliness especially painful is that it happens inside intimacy. You didn't choose distance, you chose closeness. Yet somehow, closeness never fully arrives. This isn't because you're needy. It isn't because you ask for too much. And it certainly isn't because you're broken. Often, it's because you are emotionally present, while your partner never learned how to be. Emotional loneliness in relationships rarely comes from a lack of love. More often, it comes from a lack of emotional maturity. Many people grow up in environments where feelings were inconvenient, ignored, or unsafe. They learned early that survival meant staying functional, composed, agreeable, not emotionally honest. So they learn to disconnect, and later, they bring that disconnection into their relationships. When you try to talk about your inner world, they may respond with logic instead of empathy. When you express pain, they may feel attacked rather than curious. When you ask for emotional presence, they may hear it as criticism. Not because they don't care, but because they were never taught how to stay present with emotion. And here's the painful paradox. You can feel lonelier with an emotionally unavailable partner than you ever felt when you were single. Because now, your nervous system is reaching for connection and keeps finding a wall. Over time, you begin to adapt. You stop sharing fully. You minimize your needs. You become low maintenance to preserve peace. And slowly, without realizing it, you abandon yourself to stay connected to someone else. That's the real loneliness. Not being alone with another person, but being alone with yourself while doing emotional labor for two. Emotional maturity isn't about being perfect or healed. It's about the willingness to stay present when things feel uncomfortable, to listen without defending, to validate without fixing, to remain open when emotions arise instead of shutting down. You cannot cultivate emotional maturity for someone. You can invite it, you can model it, but you cannot do it on their behalf. And the moment you stop asking, why don't they show up for me? And start asking, what am I sacrificing to stay here? Clarity begins. Loneliness in a relationship is often the body's quiet signal that emotional reciprocity is missing. And that signal deserves your attention. Let's talk about these 5 things that say. First and most important reason is that emotional immaturity creates distance even in closeness. Emotional immaturity doesn't always look like coldness or cruelty. More often, it looks like distance wrapped in closeness. 2 people sharing a bed, a home, a life, yet only one is emotionally awake. When someone hasn't learned how to stay with feelings, closeness becomes threatening. Intimacy asks for presence, vulnerability, responsiveness, and for an emotionally immature partner, those things can feel overwhelming. Not because they don't care, but because emotions were once unsafe territory for them. So they learn to survive by shutting parts of themselves down. In a relationship, this shutdown shows up quietly. Conversations stay on the surface. Pain is met with silence, logic, or deflection. Emotional moments are rushed past, minimized or reframed so they don't have to be felt. The connection doesn't break dramatically, it thins slowly, almost invisibly. And when one partner avoids feeling, the other begins to compensate. You start holding the emotional space for both of you. You sense the tension and try to smooth it. You explain your feelings carefully so they don't withdraw. You monitor their mood, anticipate their reactions, and swallow your own needs to keep the connection intact. Without naming it, you become the emotional container for the relationship. This is how distance is created inside closeness. You're physically together, but emotionally alone. Your body knows something is missing, even when your mind tries to rationalize it. You feel lonely not because there's no one there, but because no one is with you where it matters most. Over time, this imbalance takes a toll. Carrying the emotional weight alone creates exhaustion, resentment, and self-doubt. You start wondering if your needs are too much, if you're too sensitive, if wanting emotional presence is somehow unreasonable. And yet, your longing doesn't disappear because it isn't a flaw. It's a healthy nervous system asking for attunement. Emotional immaturity turns relationships into places where feelings must be managed instead of shared. where one person stays regulated by disconnecting and the other stays connected by over-functioning. It's not a failure of love, it's a failure of emotional development. And the most painful part is this: the closer you try to get, the more alone you feel. Because true closeness requires two people willing to stay present with what's alive inside them. Without that willingness, intimacy becomes a quiet, ongoing absence, felt deeply but rarely spoken. That loneliness isn't imaginary, it's information. It's your inner world recognizing that closeness without emotional presence is not intimacy at all. Second reason is your needs trigger their defenses, not their care. When you express a need in a relationship, you're not asking for too much. You're revealing something tender. You're saying, "This matters to me." But when your partner has never learned emotional safety, that tenderness doesn't land as an invitation. It lands as a threat. For someone who grew up in environments where emotions were met with dismissal, punishment, or neglect, vulnerability became dangerous. They learned early that having needs led to disappointment, shame, or conflict, so they adapted by hardening, minimizing, or disconnecting. That adaptation may have kept them safe once, but in intimacy, it becomes a barrier. This is why your request for closeness can trigger defensiveness instead of care. When you say, "I feel disconnected," they hear, "You're failing." When you ask for reassurance, they hear, "You're not enough." When you want to talk about what hurts, their body braces as if an attack is coming. Not because you're attacking, but because their nervous system doesn't know the difference between emotional honesty and emotional danger. So instead of leaning in, they protect themselves, they explain, they justify, they withdraw, they turn the conversation into logic, distraction, or silence. And suddenly, the focus shifts away from your pain and onto their discomfort. Without intending to, they make your needs the problem. Over time, can you learn this pattern? You begin to edit yourself before you speak. You soften your language. You delay bringing things up until the right moment that never quite arrives. You carry your longing quietly, hoping they'll notice without you having to ask, because asking feels like it costs too much. This is the hidden wound, not just that your needs aren't met, but that expressing them feels unsafe. Emotional safety is the ability to stay present with another person's inner world without collapsing or counterattacking. When that capacity is missing, intimacy becomes fragile, needs become landmines, and the relationship starts revolving around avoiding triggers instead of building connection. What's important to understand is this: their defensiveness is not a measure of your worth or the validity of your needs. It's a sign of undeveloped emotional capacity. Care requires the ability to tolerate discomfort in service of connection. Without that ability, even love can feel threatened by closeness, and so you're left in a painful bind, longing for connection from someone who experiences your longing as danger. That loneliness doesn't mean you're asking for too much. It means you're asking the wrong nervous system to give you what it never learned how to provide. Third reason is you're doing emotional labor without emotional reciprocity. You're doing emotional labor when you're constantly tuning in, adjusting, and holding space, while the same care is never extended back to you. It's invisible work, but it's exhausting. And when there's no emotional reciprocity, the relationship begins to quietly drain you. You notice the shifts in their mood before they do. You ask how they're feeling. You listen without interrupting. You remember what hurts them, what soothes them, what triggers their withdrawal. You offer patience when they shut down, understanding when they lash out, silence when they need space. You become fluent in their inner weather. But when it's your turn, when you're tired, confused, or in pain, the room feels empty. Not hostile, just absent. Emotional reciprocity means that care flows both ways. When it's missing, one person becomes the emotional regulator for the relationship, while the other remains largely unexamined. You're the one initiating the hard conversations. You're the one repairing after conflict. You're the one making sense of what's happening between you. Slowly, you stop being a partner and start becoming an emotional caretaker. This imbalance often feels subtle at first. You tell yourself you're just more emotionally aware. You rationalize that they express love differently. You carry the extra weight because you can. But over time, the cost shows up in your body: fatigue, resentment, numbness. Because no matter how capable you are, humans are not meant to hold relational weight alone. What makes this especially painful is that emotional labor often goes unrecognized. There's no acknowledgement, no curiosity about your inner world, no moment where they step in and say, I see how much you carry. And when care is one-sided, it slowly erodes intimacy. You begin to feel unseen, not because you aren't giving enough, but because you're giving in a place where giving is not returned. Without reciprocity, love turns into effort, connection turns into responsibility, and your nervous system stays in a constant state of vigilance, monitoring, managing, compensating while longing for someone to finally do the same for you. This isn't a failure on your part, it's a signal. A relationship cannot be sustained by one person's emotional maturity alone. Intimacy requires mutual presence, two people willing to notice, respond, and care. And when that balance is missing, the loneliness you feel isn't ingratitude, it's grief. Grief for the connection that never fully arrives, no matter how much of yourself you offer. Let's talk about the crucial thing, which is self-silencing becomes the price of peace. You minimize your truth to keep the relationship stable and lose yourself in the process. Self-silencing rarely begins as a conscious choice. It starts as a strategy, one that once made sense. You notice that certain truths create tension, that certain feelings lead to withdrawal, defensiveness, or emotional shutdown. And so, gently at first, you begin to edit yourself. You choose peace over honesty. You tell yourself it's not worth the argument, not worth the distance, not worth the emotional fallout. You learn which parts of you are welcome and which are not. So you soften your words. You delay your needs. You translate your pain into something easier to digest. You say, I'm fine, when you're not, because explaining how you really feel feels heavier than carrying it alone. You convince yourself that love means understanding, patience, flexibility, and slowly, your inner world becomes something you manage privately instead of something you share. This is how self-silencing becomes the currency of connection. When emotional safety is inconsistent, the nervous system adapts. It learns that speaking up threatens attachment, that honesty risks disconnection. And because connection feels essential, especially if old wounds are involved, you choose survival over self-expression. You stay quiet not because you lack a voice, but because your body is trying to protect the bond. But there is a cost. Each time you silence yourself, a small rupture happens inside, a subtle turning away from your own truth. Over time, these moments accumulate. You begin to feel invisible, not because you aren't seen, but because you're no longer showing yourself. You start to lose clarity about what you even want, because wanting has learned to feel dangerous. The relationship may look calm on the surface, fewer arguments, less friction. But beneath that calm is a quiet grief, because peace that requires your disappearance is not peace, it's compliance. And the body knows this. It carries the unsaid words as tension, fatigue, numbness. You may feel distant, disconnected, or strangely empty, even when nothing is wrong. That emptiness is the part of you that learned it had to go quiet to stay loved. Self-silencing is not a character flaw. It's an adaptation born from unmet emotional safety. But adaptations that once protected us can later imprison us. Love that asks you to mute your inner world asks too much. True intimacy does not demand your quiet. It makes room for your truth. And when a relationship can only remain stable if you stay small, the loneliness you feel is not a failure to appreciate what you have. It's your deeper self asking to be included again. And the last thing is that loneliness is a signal, not a flaw. It's your nervous system recognizing the absence of emotional attunement. Loneliness in a relationship is often misunderstood as a personal deficiency, as if it means you're too sensitive, too needy, or incapable of being satisfied. But loneliness is not a flaw in your character. It is a signal from your nervous system, quietly informing you that something essential is missing. Human beings are wired for emotional attunement. From our earliest moments, safety was not created by words or logic, but by presence, by being felt, mirrored, and responded to. When that attunement is absent, the body notices long before the mind can explain it. Loneliness is the body's language for that absence. You can be physically close, talk every day, share responsibilities, and still feel alone if emotional attunement is missing. Because what the nervous system is looking for isn't proximity, it's resonance. It's the sense that someone is emotionally with you, that your inner state matters, that your feelings register in another human being. When that resonance doesn't happen, the nervous system goes into a low-grade state of alert. You may feel restless, heavy, or disconnected. You might start questioning yourself, wondering why you feel empty when everything seems fine. But this confusion arises because you're trying to interpret a bodily signal through self-judgment instead of self-compassion. Loneliness shows up when your emotions are met with indifference, defensiveness, or distraction instead of curiosity and care, when your joy isn't shared, when your pain isn't held, when your inner world remains unacknowledged. Over time, the nervous system learns that reaching doesn't lead to meeting, and that learning hurts. This pain is not weakness. It's evidence of a healthy attachment system still searching for connection. The danger comes when loneliness is misread. When you tell yourself the problem is you begin to suppress the signal. You normalize emotional absence. You adapt to less than what your body is asking for. And slowly you move further away from your own truth. But loneliness is not asking you to shrink. It's asking you to listen. It's an invitation to ask deeper questions. Am I emotionally met here? Am I allowed to be fully myself? Is there space for my inner life? These questions aren't meant to create blame, they're meant to restore alignment. Your nervous system is remarkably wise. It recognizes attunement the way a compass recognizes north. When it signals loneliness, it isn't condemning you, it's guiding you, pointing you back toward connection, authenticity, and the kind of intimacy where you no longer have to doubt whether your presence truly matters. Healthy love doesn't require you to disappear. It doesn't ask you to translate your pain into palatable language, and it doesn't leave you alone while standing right beside someone. Emotional connection isn't about intensity, it's about presence. And you deserve a relationship where you don't have to beg to be emotionally met.